This is a good one that Dylan brought up, that every year people get frustrated, we do too, with how to get out of a stand. And I would say most of we shoot most of our bucks in the morning. Over the years, 70% of my mature bucks, and that number goes down a little bit throughout the years. It has gone down a little bit. It used to be more like 80%, 85%, because I'd put so much into just those morning hunts because I had to maximize my time. I often used to say I'd take the first 5 morning sits in November, first 5 days, over the rest of the season. I'm going to kill my mature buck using my target buck, and if that's what I had to choose. But a lot of folks are hunting afternoons, evenings. They get off work, they can get out in their stand, they go into work early, they can get out early, and so you're spending a lot of time hunting afternoon hunts. And when you do that, you have a hard time getting out of your stand, and even morning stands, you have a hard time getting it out. I want to start with, though, number one, and this coincides with number two. You have to get into your stand first, and there's a common theme to this. And getting into a stand, for example, if it's a bedding area stand, you're getting in there before it gets daylight, and you're going around food, and you're getting in. And so just by timing of the day, you're getting into that stand at an appropriate time that keeps you from spooking deer. In the afternoon, you're getting into a food source movement stand. Maybe not necessarily on the food source, because then you're spooking out the food source sometimes if you can't get in and out, and you're hurting your stand, which we'll talk about at the end. But bottom line is that in the afternoon, you're focusing more on food, so you have to avoid a bedding area going in. Instead, you're cheating to the food source side because deer aren't there at 3 in the afternoon. It's getting dark at 7. You're getting into your stand, and then you're waiting for that food source movement, and then you're getting out. So you have to get in first, and a lot of times it's the opposite of getting out. So when I say which route, there's a lot of times where you could go into an evening stand, an afternoon stand. You can walk right through the food source. We've been doing that for decades. Walk right through the food source, get into a stand, blow your scent to a non-deer area, maybe a deep gorge, maybe an open field where the deer don't travel through during daylight, maybe a distant river where they're not crossing that water, distant house, factory, school, road, whatever it might be. But then you have to get out. And when I say which route, just because you went in one way does not mean you have to go out the same way that you went in. And that's really important to understand. When we sit in those bedding area stands in the morning, we're going in the non-food source side to get into that stand, sit on the back side of bedding. But when we get out, we go in and out through that food source side. So we're going in an opposite way much of the time. There are stands we have here that there might be food, there might be deer feeding out in a food source. And so we would go in on the food source side, deer are feeding now in the food source. We would have to go out through the wood side to get back and to get out of there. So we're going in a common theme here. So you have to determine which route to get out. That's one of the aspects I really want you to understand, or concepts, that you don't need to go in the same way or out the same way that you went in. A lot of times it's opposite. Vehicle pickup. I can remember years ago, I was hunting in Coon Valley, Wisconsin, where I've hunted for many years, and I would just be guessing that this was 2012, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in that range. I would guess probably about 2012, 13, right around there. But I can remember sitting on a fence row stand. The deer had passed, but then they're still out in the fields, and there's a lot of deer. My wind was blowing in the right direction, but if I got out of that stand after dark and walked out, I would have been in trouble. I thought I might be in trouble. So what was the answer? I called my good buddy Dave. He went and got my pickup truck from where I had parked to get into that stand, drove up on the property, vehicle running, step out into the back of the pickup, get in, and get out of there. I'd much rather have a vehicle spook those deer after dark. We have so many times. That's why I encourage you to go get a deer after dark that you've shot. For one, it's social. Then you can have your buddies, your friends, your family all go together. It's a celebration time. You have multiple eyes, flashlights to look for blood. But it's a great time. Some of my favorite times hunting are going in and tracking deer. Dylan going in with Jen and tracking deer, tracking Dante's deer that same night. Hunter Rude last year tracking bow with Jen and I together. It was an awesome time. We have a good time. It's very rewarding, very emotional time. So when we go in after dark, we leave the machine running, we keep the voices down, And what I found is the deer are very, very forgiving of vehicles and no voices after dark compared to doing that same thing at lunchtime. So opening day of gun season, what is the worst time of the day for you to get your deer out? Lunchtime, 1, 2, anytime during daylight. Go after dark. You know, granted, it's not a heat wave and you're going to lose deer meat, that kind of thing. I'm not saying that. There's a time when you just have to go in, but most of the time you can wait. And waiting is always good. And again, it's social. So we like vehicle pickup after dark if that's what we have to do. It's a really good option. You ever bark like a yote or yip like a coyote to get deer away? You know, it's interesting, and this is kind of telling. Well, maybe it's telling you my skills to call coyotes, but I've yipped like a coyote, and I'll spare you with that sound. But I've yipped like a coyote from the stand, and the deer just turn around and look at me. I think they're waiting for a coyote to come out of the brush. They don't see it, so then they just go back to feeding. I've yipped more. I've tried to bark, and they don't come running. Finally they do, but I had to make a lot of noise to do so. So that's one way to get something out. I've thrown an arrow down in my small game arrow down on the ground to try to make some noise, and then they just look up or look around, and then they go back to feeding. Possible ways. One of the things that you need to realize about getting in and getting out, it's a common theme, is to understand your planned entrance and exit strategy should revolve solely around where the deer are and where they're not. This can be very hard to do on private land that has been randomly built. You should have food sources over here. I mean, you can have a little bit over here, and then you have bedding over here. When you have bedding and AM stands over here, you have afternoon and food sources, PM stands over here. When you have that separation of food and bedding, and you don't merge the two together, meaning you don't put a food source in the middle of a bedding area, then the deer become very specific in their movements. They're a lot less random, meaning they're going to be here or there. They're going to be near bedding in the afternoon because they're already there when you go in. They're going to be around food after dark when you get out of the stand. When you go in the morning, they're probably around food or in between there and the bedding. So if you go in closer to bedding, less likely to spook them. So learn how to either on private land, build your property so you're not making it random. Food everywhere is not a good thing. Just like bedding area everywhere is not a good thing. Then you don't know where they're at. Understand on public land, this is where they feed, which could change by the week or every couple weeks. And this is where they bed, which could change depending on where they're feeding. You know that, then when you go into the morning and the afternoon, you're avoiding where they're either feeding or where they're bedding, and it makes it a whole lot easier. Either you find it on public land or you build it on private land. One of my favorite places to hunt in the UP of Michigan is a public land spot where I'm getting in the middle, meaning 3/4 of a mile or more from any bait pile, which makes up the food sources during gun season. So I'm coming into the middle where the nearest bait pile might be 3/4 of a mile away. I'm getting in the middle of all that. So when I go in the morning and I sit down in that location, we typically don't see deer till 9, 10 o'clock at the very earliest. We're seeing a lot of our best deer between 10 and 1, 2, 3. And the closer it gets to dark, doesn't make sense. We're not seeing very many deer. We could actually walk out the last hour of daylight and probably wouldn't even miss an opportunity because they're all gravitating back 3/4 of a mile and going towards our food sources. Because we're hunting big open public land, they're a long ways from us towards dark, and they could be a long ways from that bait pile, but when you have 3/4 of a mile to burn, they have a lot of movement, a lot of ground to cover, and even if they get to that bait an hour after dark, they were gone from our spots an hour before dark. And so that allows us to get in and out without spooking deer on public land if you understand where they're feeding and where they're bedding and you plan your routes accordingly. Get out when the coast is clear. This is one I forgot, Dylan reminded me of, where there's a lot of times you can sit till legal shooting light is 7:22 and you're thinking, man, I haven't seen anything yet. It's 7:15. I can still see to shoot. The coast is clear, it's quiet, you don't hear anything coming, get out now. Because the worst thing that happens, you get out, you wait till 7:22, you start getting things together, and then 7:28, when you're about to get out of your stand or blind, all of a sudden a group of does comes in. What do? Do you bark like a coyote? Do you get a vehicle to pick you up? Or do you spook them unknowingly and you get out of your stand and now you just ruin that location for the next night? Always remember, number 7 here, you may have to change things up. What I mean by that is if you have a food source that you can't get in or out without spooking deer, then maybe you just don't hunt there. That food source might have value. If you can get around it and you can get to hunt bedding areas, movement to and from, that's of high value, especially if the deer can get to that food source and just feel like they are completely safe. But if you spook them one time, really bad. Spook them 2 times, 3 times, you ruin the area. And often, if those deer are not coming to that food source during daylight, why are they going to bed in those bedding areas 200 yards away that relate to that food source? You just ruin the whole movement. And on 40 acres, you just burned out the entire 40 acres. Learn to move where the deer aren't. It seems so basic, but part of that is very complex because you have to figure out where food needs to go, where food is on public land, where bedding areas are, and that changes on public land. Those areas we hunt on public land, for example, in that location that I was talking about up in the UP in Michigan, terrible areas to hunt in mid-October or October 1st because the deer are all up in the hardwoods somewhere. They're not down in the swamps. They're all on food sources of the moment at that time. People are starting to bait, starting to get into the woods more the end of October for the November 15th opener, and things really change around the 10th of November and into the 30th of November at the end of gun season. So deer that were in a certain location November 1st, November 5th, are not there by the 10th of November, and you won't even see any sign until then. So even learning where deer are at seasonally, let alone, or by the week, let alone by the day or morning, that'll help you out so much. And I hope some of these other tips help you out too, to not only get out of the stand, but also in the stand in the first place. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our Earthway spreaders for sale, great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the Rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.